There is a quiet truth most people never stop to question. You don't experience life directly. You experience it through a lens. Every situation you face, every conversation that stays in your mind, every moment that feels unfair, overwhelming, or heavy, none of it reaches you exactly as it is. It all passes through an invisible filter inside your mind. And that filter quietly shapes what you see, what you believe, and how you respond. Two people can stand in the same place, live through the same event, and walk away with completely different lives. One feels defeated, the other feels challenged. One gives up, the other grows stronger, not because life treated them differently, but because they looked at it through a different lens. Most of us are never taught to examine that lens, and we grow up assuming that the way we see the world is simply reality. We believe our thoughts are facts. We trust our first interpretations without questioning where they came from. Over time, this lens becomes so familiar that we forget it even exists. We stop seeing through it and start seeing as it. History quietly reminds us of this again and again. In ancient times, when life was harsh and uncertain, some thinkers understood that suffering was not always caused by events themselves, but by the meaning people attached to those events. While wars were fought, empires collapsed, and exile was common, there were individuals who learned to survive, not by changing the world around them, but by changing the way they understood it. They realized that the mind could either become a prison or a place of strength, and that insight never disappeared. We just stopped paying attention to it. Today, life may look different on the surface, but the inner struggle remains the same. People feel stuck, anxious, exhausted, or lost, not always because their circumstances are unbearable, but because the way they interpret those circumstances drains them. The pressure you feel may not come from life itself, but from the lens you're using to look at it. And the most difficult part is this. We often try to fix the outside before we ever question the inside. We change jobs, relationships, cities, routines. We wait for motivation. We hope time will somehow make things clearer. But if the lens stays the same, the view never truly changes. The patterns repeat. The frustration returns. Different chapters, same story. This audiobook is not about forcing positive thinking. It's not about denying pain or pretending everything is fine. And it's not about becoming someone else overnight. It's about learning to pause, to notice the lens you've been living through, to understand how your mindset quietly shapes what you see as possible, what you believe you deserve, and how you respond when life doesn't go as planned. When you change the way you look at something, the thing itself begins to change. Not because it magically disappears, but because your relationship with it shifts. You don't need to rebuild your entire life to move forward. Sometimes, all you need is a clearer way of seeing it. Over the next chapters, we won't rush. We won't overwhelm you with techniques or theories. We'll simply explore how your inner lens was formed, how it influences your daily life, and how small shifts in perspective can create real, lasting change. Not through force, but through awareness. If you've ever felt like you're doing everything right, but still feel stuck, if you've ever wondered why the same problems keep showing up in different forms, if you've ever sensed that the issue might not be life itself, but the way you're seeing it, then this journey is for you. And before we continue, there's one small thing I'd like to ask. If this message resonates with you, if you know someone who feels overwhelmed, lost, or quietly struggling, please share this video with them. Sometimes, the right perspective at the right moment can change more than we realize. Chapter 1. The Invisible Lens. You live through. Most people believe they see life clearly. They trust their judgments. They trust their instincts. They trust the stories they tell themselves about who they are, what the world is like, and what is possible for them. And because those thoughts feel familiar, they assume they must be true. But what they are really trusting is a lens they've been using for so long that they no longer notice it. Your mindset is not a single thought. It's not an opinion you consciously choose. It's a quiet system that runs in the background, shaping how you interpret everything before you even have time to think. It decides what feels threatening, what feels hopeful, and what feels pointless. Long before you react, your lens has already made a judgment. This is why two people can receive the same criticism and walk away completely differently. One hears an attack and feels smaller, the other hears information and grows sharper. The words were the same. The lens was not. Throughout history, this invisible difference has separated those who endured from those who collapsed. Consider people who lived during times of exile in the ancient world. To be removed from one's home meant losing identity, status, and security. Many saw exile as the end of life itself. But there were individuals who interpreted exile differently. Instead of seeing it as punishment, they saw it as separation from distraction. Instead of humiliation, they saw clarity. What changed was not their situation, but the lens through which they understood it. This ability to reinterpret reality wasn't accidental. It came from awareness. Most of us don't realize that our lens was formed long before we had the ability to question it. Childhood experiences, early failures, moments of shame or praise, these all quietly shaped how we learn to see ourselves and the world. Over time, these interpretations hardened into assumptions, and assumptions turned into automatic reactions. You may think you're reacting to life, but you're often reacting to meaning you assigned years ago. A small example makes this clearer. Imagine two people losing their jobs on the same day. One immediately thinks, "This always happens to me, I'm not good enough." The other thinks, "This hurts, but it's not the end. I'll find another way." The emotional impact, the decisions they make next, even the future they move toward, all of it begins with interpretation, not the event itself. The invisible lens doesn't announce itself. It feels like common sense. It feels like truth. And that's what makes it powerful. History shows that societies, not just individuals, live through shared lenses as well. There were times when entire populations believed certain limits were natural and unchangeable, that certain people were meant to rule and others were meant to serve, that progress was impossible, that suffering was inevitable. These beliefs weren't enforced only by force. They were sustained by mindset. When the lens finally shifted, the world followed. But for most individuals, the danger isn't oppression from the outside. It's unconscious loyalty to an old way of seeing. Your lens may tell you that you're behind in life, that others are luckier, that effort doesn't pay off, that change is risky, or that staying the same is safer. And because these thoughts repeat themselves quietly, they start to feel like facts instead of interpretations. This is how the lens becomes invisible. There is a story from history about a man who was imprisoned for years, stripped of freedom and certainty. Instead of allowing bitterness to take over, he used isolation to observe his own thinking. He paid attention to how fear distorted his perception and how calm clarified it. When he eventually returned to public life, he was not weakened by his experience. He was refined by it. The prison did not shape him as much as the way he chose to interpret it. This is not about romanticizing hardship. It's about recognizing that the same hardship can produce different inner outcomes. Your mindset is not what you say out loud. It's what you assume silently. Current assumptions are rarely questioned unless life forces us to pause. Most people wait for something to break before they examine their lens. A failure, a loss, a deep sense of dissatisfaction they can't explain. They feel stuck without knowing why. They feel exhausted even when life looks fine on the surface. What they're experiencing isn't always burnout from effort. It's friction from seeing life through a lens that no longer fits who they are becoming. The lens that once protected you may now be limiting you. The way you learned to think may have helped you survive, but survival and growth require different perspectives. A lens built for protection often sees danger where there is possibility. A lens built for certainty resists change, even when change is necessary. Recognizing this is not about blame, it's about clarity. You didn't choose your original lens consciously, but you can choose whether to keep using it unconsciously. The first step is noticing when your reactions feel automatic, when your thoughts repeat the same conclusions, when your emotional responses feel familiar, predictable, and heavy. These moments are clues. They point not to problems in life, but to patterns in perception. You don't need to tear the lens apart. You don't need to fight your thoughts. Awareness alone begins to loosen their grip. In the chapters ahead, we'll explore where this lens comes from, how it shapes your inner world, and why small shifts in perspective can change the direction of your life without force or denial. But before any of that can happen, there is one essential realization to hold on to. You're not seeing life as it is. You're seeing it as you have learned to see it, and once you recognize the lens, you're no longer trapped inside it. Chapter 2. How the Past quietly programs your view. Most people believe their mindset is something they develop as adults. They assume the way they think today comes from choices they've consciously made, books they've read, lessons they've learned, decisions they've taken. But the truth is quieter than that. Long before you ever tried to improve yourself, long before you questioned your direction in life, your lens was already being shaped. Slowly, repeatedly, almost invisibly. Your past didn't just happen to you, it trained you. Every experience you went through taught your mind how to interpret the world. Success taught you what to expect. Failure taught you what to avoid. Praise taught you what felt safe. Criticism taught you what felt dangerous. Over time, your mind stopped treating these moments as memories and started using them as reference points. This is how the past programs perception. You may believe you're responding to the present, but very often you're responding to echoes. A tone of voice reminds you of being dismissed. A challenge feels heavier because it resembles an earlier failure. An opportunity feels risky because once, long ago, risk came with pain. None of this happens consciously. That's what makes it powerful. History shows us that people have always lived under the influence of inherited lenses. In ancient societies, children didn't just inherit land or status. They inherited beliefs about what was possible for them. If you were born into a certain class, your future was already defined in the minds of others. Over time, those external expectations became internal limits. What began as social structure turned into self-perception. Even when societies changed, many individuals remained mentally trapped in an older version of reality. The world moved forward, but their lens did not. The same pattern plays out on a personal level. You might intellectually know that your past doesn't define you. You might even repeat that idea to yourself. But emotionally, the past still whispers instructions. It tells you when to hold back, when to stay quiet, when to lower expectations. And because those instructions once protected you, your mind trusts them. At some point in history, survival required caution. Mistrust kept people alive. Conformity reduced danger. Questioning authority came with consequences. Those conditions shaped entire generations of mindset. Even centuries later, traces of those patterns still exist in how people respond to uncertainty. The mind remembers what kept it safe. This is why changing mindset isn't simply about adopting new ideas. New ideas are filtered through old assumptions. You can hear something inspiring and still feel unmoved. You can understand a concept logically and still struggle to live it emotionally. Because the lens hasn't changed. Think about how quickly your mind labels situations. Too risky, Too late. Not for me. That's not laziness. That's conditioning. It's the mind doing what it learned to do, protect you from repeating pain. But protection and progress don't always align. There's a historical account of scholars who lived during times of political instability. Speaking openly could cost them their freedom or their lives. So they learned to think carefully, to observe quietly, to speak indirectly. That mindset kept them alive. But generations later, when conditions shifted, the same cautious lens began to limit expression and innovation. What once ensured survival eventually became a constraint. On a personal level, this happens when the version of you that learned to cope is no longer the version of you that needs to grow. You might still be seeing challenges through the eyes of someone who once had fewer resources, less confidence, less freedom. Your lens hasn't updated, even though your life has, and the mind resists updating because familiarity feels safer than truth. One of the most subtle effects of past conditioning is how it shapes your sense of identity. You don't just think thoughts, you think as someone. Someone who struggles. Someone who's behind. Someone who always has to try harder. These identities weren't chosen. They were assembled quietly, moment by moment, experience by experience. Once identity forms, the lens solidifies. History teaches us that identity can be rewritten, but only when people become conscious of the stories they've been living inside. When explorers began to question old maps, the world expanded. When thinkers questioned inherited beliefs, new eras began. But none of that happened accidentally. It began with awareness. The same applies inward. You don't need to reject your past. You don't need to relive it or fight it. You simply need to recognize when it is shaping your present without permission. Notice the moments when your reaction feels older than the situation, when your fear feels larger than the risk, when your hesitation doesn't match your current reality. These are signs that the lens is operating on outdated information. Your mind is loyal to what once kept you safe. But safety is not the same as fulfillment. As you move forward, remember this: the past only has power when it remains unseen. The moment you recognize its influence, it begins to loosen, not through force, but through clarity. In the next chapter, we'll go deeper into how meaning, not events themselves, creates emotional reality, and how learning to question that meaning can change the way you experience life, without needing to change life itself. Chapter 3. You don't react to life. You react to meaning. It feels like life hits us directly. A comment hurts, a situation angers us, a failure discourages us. And in those moments, it seems obvious where the pain comes from. Someone said something went wrong. Something didn't turn out the way we hoped. But if you slow the moment down, you'll notice something important. Between what happens and how you feel, there is a quiet step most people never see. Meaning. Life presents events. Your mind assigns meaning, and your emotions respond to that meaning, not to the event itself. This is why the same situation can produce completely different emotional reactions in different people. A critical remark can feel like an insult to one person and like useful feedback to another. So a delay can feel like rejection to one person and like relief to another. The external facts are identical. The inner experience is not. History understood this long before modern psychology gave it names. Ancient thinkers observed that suffering often increased not because events became worse, but because people layered interpretation on the top of reality. They noticed that when meaning went unquestioned, emotion followed automatically. Fear, anger, shame, none of them appeared on their own. They were invited in by interpretation. This doesn't mean emotions are wrong. It means they are informative. Your emotions reveal how you are interpreting what's happening. Most people believe they are reacting naturally. But natural reactions are often just familiar interpretations repeating themselves. The mind fills in the blanks instantly. and using patterns it has relied on before. And because this happens so quickly, it feels like truth rather than habit. Think about how often your mind jumps to conclusions. A message goes unanswered, and the meaning becomes rejection. A mistake happens, and the meaning becomes failure. A quiet room becomes awkwardness. Silence becomes judgment. None of these meanings are guaranteed. They are interpretations, but they arrive with confidence. Once meaning is assigned, emotion follows immediately. This is where many people feel trapped. They try to control emotions directly. They tell themselves to calm down, to be positive, to not overreact. But emotion doesn't respond well to force. Emotion responds to understanding. If you change the meaning, the emotion shifts naturally. History offers countless examples of this principle in action. And there were individuals who faced public humiliation, loss of status, or exile. Experiences that, by most standards, would destroy a person's sense of worth. Yet some emerged calmer, clearer, even stronger. Not because the events were easy, but because the meaning they assigned was different. Where others saw disgrace, they saw freedom from expectation. Where others saw loss, they saw simplification. Their inner experience changed because their interpretation changed. In everyday life, this plays out in quieter ways. You might interpret a challenge as proof that you're not capable. Or you might interpret the same challenge as evidence that you're stretching beyond what's familiar. One meaning shrinks you, the other strengthens you. The situation itself remains unchanged. Meaning is the lens in action. The most emotional exhaustion doesn't come from what happens to us. It comes from the constant pressure of the stories we tell ourselves about what happens. These stories run quietly in the background, shaping how heavy life feels. And because they're internal, we rarely question them. The key isn't to stop assigning meaning. The mind will always do that. The key is to notice which meanings you default to, especially in moments of stress, disappointment, or uncertainty. Ask yourself, what am I making this mean? That simple question creates space. It slows the automatic response. It allows the lens to come into focus. You may realize that a situation doesn't mean what you thought it did. Or you may realize that even if it does, there are other interpretations available. Ones that don't drain you as much. Ones that don't close every door. This is not about choosing the most optimistic meaning. It's about choosing the most honest one. Sometimes honesty includes discomfort. Sometimes it includes responsibility, but it also includes freedom from unnecessary suffering. When meaning is examined, emotion becomes flexible instead of overwhelming. You're no longer at the mercy of every reaction. You begin to respond instead of react. This is a subtle shift, but it's powerful. Because once you realize that meaning shapes experience, you stop trying to control life itself. You start paying attention to how you're interpreting it. And that's where real change begins. In the next chapter, we'll explore what happens when an outdated lens turns into a prison, and why many people feel stuck not because life is impossible, but because they're seeing it through a perspective that no longer serves them. Chapter 4. When the lens becomes a prison. Every lens begins as a form of protection. At some point in your life, the way you learned to see the world helped you survive. It helped you make sense of uncertainty. It helped you avoid pain. It helped you adapt. That lens wasn't wrong. It was necessary. But what protects you at one stage of life can quietly imprison you at another. The danger isn't having a mindset. The danger is using the same one long after it has stopped serving you. Most people don't feel trapped because life is unbearable. They feel trapped because their perspective hasn't evolved. They keep looking at new situations with an old lens, and the mismatch creates frustration, exhaustion, and confusion they can't quite explain. History shows this pattern clearly. Saying there were eras when rigid belief systems brought stability to societies. Clear hierarchies, unquestioned traditions, and fixed roles reduced chaos. For a time, these lenses created order. But as the world changed, the same beliefs began to suffocate growth. What once provided structure became a cage. Civilizations didn't collapse overnight. They stagnated first, unable to see beyond the limits of their own assumptions. The same happens inside a person. You may still be living by conclusions you formed when you had less power, fewer choices, or less self-trust. Back then, caution made sense. Silence kept you safe. Lowering expectations reduced disappointment. But if those same strategies still guide you today, they may now be limiting your growth rather than protecting your well-being. And a lens becomes a prison when it stops being questioned. The prison is invisible because it feels familiar. You don't notice the bars because they're made of thoughts you've repeated for years. This is just how I am. That's not for people like me. I missed my chance. It's too late now. These statements don't sound dramatic. They sound reasonable, and that's what makes them powerful. History offers countless examples of individuals who lived under internal prisons long after external chains were gone. When social structures shifted, some people remained mentally bound to old limitations. Freedom existed, but they couldn't see it through the lens they were still using. On a personal level, this often shows up as chronic dissatisfaction. You may function well, you may appear successful, but internally, something feels tight, constrained, as if you're operating below your true capacity. That tension isn't a flaw, it's a signal. It's the discomfort that arises when your inner lens no longer matches your outer reality. Many people respond to this tension by pushing harder. They work more, they consume more information, they chase motivation, but effort alone can't solve a problem of perception. If the lens remains unchanged, increased effort only creates more pressure. A prison mindset doesn't always feel negative. Sometimes it feels safe, predictable, controlled. But safety without growth eventually becomes stagnation. There is a historical account of a leader who ruled during a period of transition. He governed using strategies that had once brought order and respect. But as conditions changed, those same strategies created resentment and resistance. And his downfall didn't come from external attack, it came from an inability to adjust his perspective. The lesson is simple, but uncomfortable. Strength without adaptability becomes weakness. Inside your own life, the lens becomes a prison when you stop allowing yourself new interpretations. When every challenge is filtered through fear. When every opportunity is measured against past failure. When every unfamiliar path feels like a threat rather than a possibility. You don't need to destroy the lens, you need to loosen it. Awareness is the key that unlocks the door. Begin by noticing when your thoughts feel absolute, when they leave no room for alternatives, when they shut down curiosity instead of inviting it. These are signs that the lens has hardened. The goal isn't to abandon caution or wisdom, it's to update them. A flexible lens doesn't deny reality. It sees it more accurately. It allows complexity. It adapts to new information. And most importantly, it gives you room to grow without feeling unsafe. Freedom doesn't come from removing limits all at once. It comes from questioning the ones you've been carrying quietly. In the next chapter, we'll explore the cost of holding on to the same way of seeing for too long, and why time alone doesn't change anything unless perspective changes with it. Chapter 5. The cost of seeing the same way for too long time does not change perspective on its own. This is one of the most uncomfortable truths to accept. Many people believe that if they just wait long enough, things will make sense. That clarity will arrive with age. That experience will automatically bring wisdom. But time only amplifies what is already there. If the lens remains the same, the view simply repeats itself in different forms. This is why some people feel older without feeling wiser. They've lived through many chapters, but they've been reading them with the same interpretation each time. Different jobs, different relationships, different environments, yet the same frustrations return. Not because life is stuck, but because perception hasn't evolved. History is full of examples where time passed, but insight did not. Empires that refused to question their worldview slowly lost relevance. Leaders who relied on strategies that once worked eventually became obstacles to progress. Their downfall wasn't caused by sudden failure, but by gradual blindness. They kept seeing the world as it used to be, not as it was becoming. On a personal level, the cost of this blindness is subtle but heavy. You may notice a quiet fatigue that doesn't go away with rest, a sense that you're trying harder but getting less in return. Motivation comes and goes, but something deeper feels unchanged. That's not laziness, it's friction, created when effort collides with outdated perspective. Seeing the same way for too long narrows possibility. When your lens doesn't shift, curiosity fades. You stop asking new questions, you stop imagining different outcomes. That life begins to feel predictable in the worst way, not calm, but flat. Challenges feel repetitive rather than meaningful. Growth feels distant rather than demanding. This is how people become emotionally tired, even when nothing is wrong. They're not exhausted by action. They're exhausted by interpretation. There's a historical pattern where entire generations inherited a fixed worldview and passed it down unquestioned. At first, it provided identity and coherence, but over time it limited exploration and innovation. Progress didn't stall because of lack of talent, but because of lack of perspective. The same thing happens within an individual when identity becomes rigid. You may still see yourself as the person you were during an earlier chapter of life. The cautious one, the overlooked one, the one who had to struggle. That identity once made sense. It explained your choices. It justified your fears. But if it remains unexamined, it becomes a ceiling rather than a foundation. The cost isn't just missed opportunities. It's the slow erosion of self-trust. When you keep responding to new situations with old conclusions, you begin to doubt your ability to change. You tell yourself that growth is temporary, that setbacks define you, that patterns are permanent. And because these thoughts feel familiar, they feel true. But familiarity is not accuracy. Time alone doesn't free you from a lens. Awareness does. The moment you notice that your reactions are predictable, that your conclusions arrive too quickly, that your inner dialogue sounds rehearsed, that's the moment growth becomes possible. Not because you force change, but because you interrupt repetition. Seeing differently doesn't require dramatic shifts. It begins with small adjustments. Pausing before labeling an experience. Questioning whether your conclusion is current or inherited. Allowing uncertainty instead of rushing to judgment. History shows that renewal begins when people stop assuming that longevity equals correctness. When they allow themselves to learn again. When they admit that what once worked may no longer be enough. The same invitation exists in your own life. You don't need to discard your past. You don't need to reject your experiences. You only need to stop letting them decide everything. In the next chapter, we'll explore how to begin shifting the lens gently, without fighting yourself, without forcing optimism, and without losing the parts of your mindset that still serve you. Chapter 6. Shifting the lens. Without fighting yourself. Most people assume that changing mindset requires force. They think they need stronger discipline, more motivation, or constant positive thinking. They try to replace old thoughts with new ones, to silence doubt, to push through resistance. And when that doesn't work, they blame themselves for not trying hard enough. But the mind doesn't change through pressure. It changes through understanding. A lens doesn't shift because you demand it to. It shifts when you begin to see its limits. History quietly supports this idea. Periods of true transformation, whether cultural, philosophical, or personal, rarely began with rebellion against everything that came before. They began with questioning, with curiosity, with the willingness to look at familiar ideas from a slightly different angle. And the same principle applies inward. Your current lens exists for a reason. It protected you. It helped you adapt. It made sense of chaos when you needed structure. Fighting it only creates inner conflict. The goal isn't to destroy your old way of seeing, it's to update it. The first step in shifting perspective is observation, not judgment, not correction, just noticing. Notice the thoughts that appear when you're under pressure. Notice how quickly your mind reaches conclusions. Notice which situations trigger fear, defensiveness, or withdrawal. These reactions are not failures. They are signals. They reveal the lens at work. When you observe without attacking yourself, the mind becomes less rigid. It doesn't feel threatened, and when the mind feels safe, it becomes more flexible. Well, there's a historical account of thinkers who were forced into silence during times of censorship. They couldn't speak openly, but they could observe. Over time, observation sharpened their insight. When expression became possible again, their perspective was clearer, not louder. Silence refined their lens. In your own life, this means giving yourself permission to pause, to not immediately react, to sit with uncertainty for a moment longer than usual. That pause creates space between stimulus and interpretation, and in that space, choice appears. Another important shift comes from asking better questions. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" ask, "What am I making this mean?" Instead of, "What's wrong with me?" ask, "What belief is being activated right now?" These questions don't deny difficulty. They clarify it. Shifting the lens is not about reframing everything positively. It's about reframing accurately. Sometimes accuracy reveals strength. Sometimes it reveals responsibility. Sometimes it reveals that a fear is outdated. Clarity is more powerful than optimism. The mind resists change when it feels judged, but it relaxes when it feels understood. That's why gentle awareness works where force fails. As you begin to shift your lens, you may notice discomfort, not because something is wrong, but because familiarity is being challenged. Growth often feels like uncertainty before it feels like freedom. History shows that progress is rarely comfortable in the moment, but it becomes obvious in hindsight. You don't need to change who you are. You don't need to silence every negative thought. You only need to become aware of how you're seeing. And that awareness, practiced consistently, begins to reshape the lens from the inside. In the next chapter, we'll explore why clarity itself is a quiet form of power, and how a calm, steady perspective allows you to see further, decide better, and move through life with less inner resistance. One of the biggest misunderstandings about mindset change is the belief that you must become someone entirely different. That belief alone creates resistance. When you think change means erasing your past, rejecting your instincts, or betraying the version of you that survived difficult moments, your mind naturally pushes back. It tightens its grip. It defends what it knows, not because it wants to hold you back, but because it wants to keep you safe. This is why real transformation often begins quietly, and it begins when you stop arguing with your thoughts and start listening to them. When you treat them not as enemies, but as messengers carrying outdated information. A thought like, "This won't work," is rarely about the present moment. It's about a past experience that taught your mind to be cautious. When you recognize this, the thought loses some of its authority. You don't have to agree with it. You don't have to silence it. You simply acknowledge where it's coming from. That acknowledgement alone shifts the relationship between you and your inner world. You move from being controlled by the lens to observing it. There is a historical pattern worth noticing here. Great shifts in human thinking didn't come from denying what people believed before. They came from expanding what people were willing to question. Old maps weren't destroyed when explorers realized they were incomplete. They were revised, and those revisions didn't erase the past. They built upon it. Your mindset works the same way. You don't abandon caution, you refine it. You don't reject fear, you understand it. You don't force confidence, you grow clarity. Another powerful way to shift the lens is through language. Pay attention to the words you use internally. Words like always, never, everyone, nothing. These words don't describe reality, they describe emotional certainty. They signal that the lens has narrowed. When you soften language, perspective softens with it. And instead of, I always mess this up, try, this is challenging for me right now. Instead of, nothing ever changes, try, I haven't seen change yet. These are not positive affirmations. They are more accurate descriptions, and accuracy calms the nervous system more than optimism ever could. As the lens begins to loosen, you may notice something subtle but important. Space. Space between a thought and a reaction. Space between an emotion and a decision. Space where choice can exist. That space is where self-mastery begins. Not with control, with awareness. And the more consistently you practice awareness, the more natural clarity becomes. You stop fighting yourself. You stop forcing change. You start seeing more clearly, and when you see clearly, your actions begin to align without effort. This is how the lens shifts. Quietly and gradually, from the inside out. Chapter 7. Clarity is a quiet form of power. Most people associate power with force. They imagine power as dominance, control, loud confidence, or the ability to impose one's will. In daily life, this belief shows up as urgency. Reacting quickly, speaking first, pushing harder, proving more. It feels active, it feels strong. But history tells a different story. The people who shaped the course of events most deeply were rarely the loudest in the room. They were the clearest. They saw further because they reacted less. Their power did not come from intensity, but from perspective. Clarity is a quiet form of power. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't rush. It doesn't need to convince. And because it is quiet, it is often underestimated, until its effects become undeniable. A calm mind is not an empty mind. It is a mind that is not being pulled in every direction at once. When the inner lens becomes clearer, decision-making changes. You stop responding to every signal. You stop mistaking noise for urgency. You begin to recognize what truly matters and what only feels important in the moment. History offers many examples of this kind of power. There were leaders who ruled during times of extreme pressure, wars, political chaos, social unrest. Some panicked, making impulsive decisions that escalated conflict. Others slowed down. They observed. They waited. And because they did, they saw options that were invisible to those trapped in reaction. Their advantage was not information. Everyone had access to the same facts. Their advantage was clarity. Clarity creates distance between stimulus and response. And in that distance, wisdom has room to operate. In modern life, that distance has nearly disappeared. We are surrounded by constant input, opinions, notifications, comparisons, expectations. The lens becomes crowded. The mind becomes reactive. And reaction feels like engagement, even when it's actually exhaustion. Many people feel overwhelmed, not because life demands too much, but because they're processing everything through a lens that never rests. A clear lens filters without shutting down. It allows you to notice what deserves your attention and what doesn't. It lets you hear criticism without collapsing and praise without losing yourself. It gives you the ability to stand in uncertainty without rushing to escape it. This kind of clarity doesn't come from avoiding difficulty. It comes from facing it without distortion. Think about moments when you felt most grounded, most steady, most capable of making good decisions. Chances are those moments weren't emotionally charged. They were quiet, centered. You weren't trying to prove anything. You were simply seeing clearly. That's not coincidence. Emotional reactivity narrows vision. Calm expands it. When the lens is clouded by fear, everything looks urgent. Every problem feels like a threat. Every delay feels personal. But when the lens clears, proportion returns. You see challenges as they are, not bigger, not smaller. This is why clarity feels like relief. Not because problems disappear, but because they take up the right amount of space. History shows that people who endured the longest hardships without losing themselves were not those who numbed emotion, but those who regulated perspective. They understood that panic is contagious, but so is calm. And calm often changes outcomes before action even begins. In your own life, clarity begins when you stop demanding immediate answers. When something goes wrong, the reactive mind asks, "What do I do right now?" The clear mind asks, "What's actually happening here?" That question alone changes everything. It slows the lens. It reduces distortion. It opens the door to insight rather than impulse. Clarity also reshapes how you relate to others. When your lens is clear, you stop personalizing everything. You recognize that other people's behavior often says more about their own lens than about you. This doesn't make you passive. It makes you precise. You respond instead of absorb. This is a form of strength that doesn't need validation. It doesn't require constant reinforcement, and it stands quietly, grounded in understanding rather than reaction. In history, many influential thinkers and leaders cultivated silence deliberately, not as withdrawal, but as discipline. Silence sharpened perception. It allowed them to hear what others missed. It reduced the noise inside so they could detect subtle patterns outside. In a world that rewards speed, choosing clarity is an act of self-mastery. It means you don't let urgency dictate importance. You don't let emotion dictate truth. You don't let noise dictate direction. This doesn't mean you hesitate forever. It means when you act, your action is aligned. Clear action is efficient. It wastes less energy. It creates fewer regrets. When the lens is clear, decisions feel simpler, not because life is simple, but because confusion has been reduced. You stop arguing internally. You stop second-guessing every move. You trust your perception because it's grounded, not reactive. Clarity also changes how you experience effort. Without clarity, effort feels heavy. You push, but you're unsure. You act, but you doubt. With clarity, effort feels clean. Even hard work carries less resistance. You know why you're doing what you're doing. You know what matters and what doesn't. That knowing is powerful. Most people search for confidence, but confidence is unstable when it's built on outcomes or approval. Clarity, on the other hand, is stable. It remains even when outcomes are uncertain. You can move forward without guarantees when your lens is clear. And this is why clarity is so rare and so valuable. It requires patience in a culture of immediacy. It requires restraint in a culture of expression. It requires awareness in a culture of distraction. But once cultivated, it becomes a quiet advantage that compounds over time. You don't need to be louder than others. You don't need to react faster. You don't need to prove more. You need to see more clearly. As your lens continues to shift, you may notice that life feels less chaotic. Not because it is, but because you're no longer amplifying the chaos through interpretation. You're standing in it with steadiness. And from that steadiness, power emerges. Not the kind that demands attention, the kind that commands respect quietly. In the final chapter, we'll explore what it means to live through a clearer lens, not as a temporary state, but as a way of being, a way of moving through life with awareness, intention, and a deeper sense of alignment with who you are becoming. Chapter 8. Living through a clearer lens. Clarity is not a moment. It is a way of living. Many people experience brief moments of insight. After a conversation, a book, a difficult event. For a short time, things feel clearer. Decisions feel lighter. The mind feels open. But then life continues. Pressure returns, and old patterns slowly reassert themselves. This is where most change quietly fades. Not because insight was false, but because it was treated as an experience rather than a practice. Living through a clearer lens means allowing awareness to become part of how you move through everyday life. Not something you access only when things go wrong, but something you carry with you when things seem normal. History shows that lasting inner change has never been dramatic. It has always been gradual. And the people who truly transformed their inner world didn't do so through sudden breakthroughs. They did it through consistency of perception. Day after day, they chose to see a little more clearly than before. They questioned assumptions. They slowed reactions. They refined interpretation. Over time, that refinement reshaped their lives. Living through a clearer lens does not mean you stop feeling doubt, fear, or uncertainty. It means you recognize them sooner. You understand where they come from, and because you understand them, they don't dominate you. A clear lens doesn't remove emotion, it gives emotion context. When something goes wrong, you still feel it, but you no longer assume it defines you. When something goes well, you appreciate it without clinging to it. You remain steady, not detached, but grounded. So this groundedness changes how you experience time. Without clarity, life often feels rushed or stagnant. You're either chasing what's next or replaying what's already happened. With clarity, attention returns to the present, not as a forced practice, but as a natural result of reduced mental noise. You stop living several steps ahead or behind yourself. You live where you are. This shift is subtle, but it alters everything. Your relationships change when you live through a clearer lens. You listen more accurately. You hear what's being said instead of what you fear it means. You respond to people as they are, not as your past taught you to expect them to be. Conflict loses its intensity when interpretation softens. Understanding replaces defensiveness. Boundaries become clearer without becoming rigid. In history, the leaders who inspired trust were not those who controlled others tightly, but those who saw people clearly. They understood motivations, fears, and limits. That understanding allowed them to guide rather than force. Clarity creates influence without aggression. The same applies to how you lead yourself. When your lens is clear, discipline stops feeling like punishment. It becomes alignment. You no longer rely on pressure to move forward. You act because your actions make sense to you. You know why they matter. This is where self-mastery becomes sustainable. Without clarity, discipline feels heavy. You push against resistance every day. With clarity, resistance decreases. Not because effort disappears, but because inner conflict does. You stop arguing with yourself. Living through a clearer lens also reshapes ambition. You no longer chase goals to escape discomfort or prove worth. You pursue what resonates with who you are becoming. Some desires fall away, not because they were wrong, but because they no longer match your perspective. This doesn't shrink your life, it simplifies it, and simplicity creates momentum. History teaches us that many breakthroughs happened not through expansion, but through reduction, removing what was unnecessary, clarifying what truly mattered. Once focus returned, progress followed naturally. The same principle applies inward. As your lens clears, you may find that you need less external validation, less comparison, less explanation. Your sense of direction becomes internal. You trust it not because it's perfect, but because it's informed by awareness. This trust is quiet, but strong. Living through a clearer lens does not mean certainty. It means honesty with uncertainty. You stop demanding guarantees from life. You accept that not everything will be known in advance. And because of that acceptance, fear loosens its grip. Fear thrives on distortion. Clarity weakens it. Over time, you may notice that challenges still appear, but they don't overwhelm you the way they used to. You face them with proportion. You take responsibility where it's yours. You release what isn't. This is emotional maturity. Not control, not suppression, but discernment. A clear lens allows you to see when to act and when to wait, when to push and when to pause, when to speak and when silence is wiser. These choices don't come from rules. They come from presence. Presence is the natural outcome of clarity, and presence changes how life feels. Moments feel fuller, decisions feel cleaner. Regret lessens because actions align more closely with understanding. Even mistakes feel different, not lighter, but more instructive. You stop seeing mistakes as verdicts. You see them as information. This mindset doesn't make life easy. It makes it navigable. History remembers people not for how perfectly they lived, but for how clearly they saw. Their clarity allowed them to adapt, to endure, and to influence the world around them without losing themselves. You don't need to become exceptional overnight to live this way. You only need to remain aware. Each day, notice how you're interpreting events. Notice where your lens narrows. Notice when reaction tries to take control, and gently return to clarity. And again and again. That repetition is what turns insight into identity. Living through a clearer lens is not about reaching a final state. It's about staying in relationship with how you see. It's an ongoing process, one that grows quieter, steadier, and more natural over time. And as it does, life begins to respond differently. Not because the world changes first, but because you do. When the lens within becomes clearer, your path doesn't disappear. It reveals itself. Step by step, with awareness, with intention, with calm strength. This is not the end of the journey. It's the way you walk it. There is one final shift that happens when you live through a clearer lens. You stop trying to escape discomfort. Not because discomfort disappears, but because you no longer interpret it as failure. You begin to see it as information, as guidance, yes, as part of movement rather than a signal to retreat. This changes how you relate to effort. Effort no longer feels like struggle against yourself. It feels like cooperation. You're no longer dragging your mind forward while it resists. You and your perspective are moving in the same direction. This alignment is rare and deeply stabilizing. When your lens is unclear, even success can feel stressful. You worry about losing it. You question whether you deserve it. You look ahead instead of standing where you are. But with clarity, success becomes quieter. It doesn't inflate you, it grounds you. You're able to enjoy progress without becoming attached to outcomes. History shows that those who endured long journeys, explorers, thinkers, builders of lasting systems, were not driven by constant certainty. They were guided by orientation, and they knew the general direction, even when the exact path was unclear. A clear lens provides orientation. It doesn't promise ease, it promises coherence. When coherence exists, life feels less fragmented. Your thoughts, actions, and values begin to line up. You stop living in pieces. You stop switching identities depending on context. You become more consistent, not rigid, but integrated. This integration is what many people describe as inner peace. Not the absence of challenge, the absence of inner contradiction. Living through a clearer lens doesn't make you immune to doubt. It makes you less ruled by it. Doubt becomes a signal to look closer, not a command to stop. Fear becomes a reminder to slow down, not a reason to withdraw. And over time, as this way of seeing becomes familiar, you may notice something quietly powerful. You trust yourself more, not because you believe you'll always be right, but because you know you'll see clearly enough to adjust when you're not. That trust is what allows you to keep moving, with steadiness, with awareness, with a lens that no longer distorts who you are becoming. And from that place, life doesn't need to be forced. It unfolds, one clear step at a time. As we come to the end of this journey, there is one idea worth holding on to. Quietly, without trying to turn it into a rule or a promise. You don't change your life by forcing it into a new shape. You change it by changing how you see it. Throughout this audiobook, we've explored a simple but often overlooked truth. Life does not reach you directly. It reaches you through a lens. A lens shaped by experience, memory, belief, fear, hope, and repetition. That lens has been with you for a long time. It has protected you, it has guided you, and at times, it has limited you. None of that makes it wrong. It makes it human. Growth does not begin when you reject who you've been. It begins when you understand how you've been seeing. When awareness replaces assumption, when curiosity replaces judgment, when clarity gently takes the place of reaction. You don't need to remember every idea you've heard here. You don't need to apply everything at once. Transformation doesn't happen that way. It happens in small, quiet moments, when you pause before reacting, when you question a familiar conclusion, when you notice your thoughts without immediately believing them. Those moments may feel insignificant. They're not. They are the moments when the lens loosens, when perception becomes flexible, when you step out of automatic patterns and into conscious choice. And each time you do that, you reclaim a little more freedom, not from life, but within it. There will still be challenges. There will still be uncertainty. There will still be days when the old lens tries to return. That's not failure, that's practice. Clarity is not something you achieve once and keep forever. It's something you return to again and again, gently, honestly, without force. As you move forward, try this simple approach. When something feels heavy, ask what you're making it mean. When emotion rises quickly, ask what lens you're looking through. When life feels stuck, ask whether perspective, not effort, is what needs to change. You may be surprised how often the answer is not action, but awareness. Over time, this way of seeing becomes natural. You stop fighting yourself. You stop needing constant reassurance. You trust your ability to see clearly enough to adjust, to learn, to continue. That trust is powerful. It allows you to move through life with steadiness instead of urgency, with intention instead of reaction, and with a sense of direction that doesn't depend on constant certainty. And perhaps most importantly, it allows you to live with more compassion for yourself and for others. Because when you understand that everyone is looking through a lens, judgment softens, patience grows, understanding deepens. This is not the end of the work. It's the beginning of a different relationship with your inner world. A relationship built on clarity rather than control, on awareness rather than avoidance, on seeing rather than assuming. If this audiobook helped you pause, reflect, or see something differently, even for a moment, then it has done its job. And if you know someone who feels overwhelmed, stuck, or quietly searching for clarity, consider sharing this with them. Sometimes, the right perspective at the right time can make more difference than we ever expect. Thank you for spending this time here, for listening, for reflecting, for choosing to look a little more closely. May the lens within continue to clear, step by step, moment by moment, as you move forward on your path.